Hey guys, it's Joe from eattheplanet.org. Today I am doing episode 3 of my series Foraging Secrets, where I highlight interesting things that beginners usually don't know. Today I'm going to be talking about the white pine tree. There are 5 edible components to the white pine tree, and a lot of these are in the winter and the early spring, and especially in the winter is a time period when other things aren't available. So first I'm going to go into some of the identification of the white pine tree, and then I'm also going to go into those 5 edible components. A lot of this information also applies to other species of pine tree and also spruce trees. Before you consume anything, pine or spruce, just Google that particular species and make sure there's no hazards associated with that species. There are no serious known hazards associated with the white pine tree, and that tree is common here in the eastern U.S. So white pines, I'll pull off a grouping here. White pines are a 5-needled pine, although a couple of needles fell off of this group. There we go. So you can see the 5 needles there in a single grouping. Spruce and fir are individually growing off the stem. Pines are always grouped. So other pines such as red pine and Austrian pine that have 2 needles per grouping. So that's the primary identification feature, and that's also the length of the needle is going to tell you what type of pine it is. So white pines have approximately 3.5 inches. The needles are approximately 3.5 inch length, and that's a good identification feature for white pines. So these are the mature pine needles. These are the needles from previous year's growth that stay on the tree, and they can be used primarily for a tea. They could technically be eaten, but they're just the texture is too prickly. I'm going to use this tree to talk about the edible new growth of the pine tree. So this again is a white pine. You can see how much growth it's got in a year. That's got to be around 8 inches at least. All that new growth, which you can see where it changes from mature growth to new growth, all that new growth is edible. So you can just break the new growth off, and that's your edible piece. If these needles are a little bit prickly, then you can pull the needles off to consume. They're soft when they're small, and they just get a little bit harder as they mature. So this is that piece I just showed you. I took all the needles off. They were getting a little hard. You can see how soft it is. Starting to get a little fibrous on the inside, so it's getting to the point of maturity where it's not going to be edible for too much longer. It's not toxic at that point. It's just not soft enough that you could eat. The end is always softer than the base. And it's got a better flavor when it's young than mature parts of the tree, like the edible inner bark, for example. So this is a photo of the male cones. You can see that they're yellowish, and that's the pollen. As they're immature, they taste more vegetative. As they mature more, you start to taste that powdery pollen, or I should say you start to feel the texture of the powdery pollen, and that can be collected, as I mentioned before, and added to baked goods and other things. I found a fallen pine branch, and I wanted to show you something. It's one of the best winter wild edibles that you can find, and that is right here, the immature pine cones. The biggest problem is they're hard to reach. They're way up in the tree. White pine can get over 100 feet tall, so if a branch falls like this one, then you'll have access to them. Or if you're taking a tree down, then you'll have access to them. Otherwise, or maybe if it's a small tree. Otherwise, it's difficult to find them. But in the winter, I'm going to pull this one apart and show you the inside here. So the inside's green, and the taste isn't too bad. The texture is not too hard, and the taste is not too bad. It's one of the best winter wild edibles. It's got like a hint of a sweet taste, maybe. but it's not, I mean, there's other parts of the pine tree that taste a lot stronger. I found this white pine that fell over, so I can take the opportunity to show you about the edible inner bark. White pine is one of the best woods for edible inner bark. I'll show you why. So the thing with the edible inner bark is you got to get a piece that's lower on the trunk. So you're going to be damaging the tree. The reason I was excited to find this down branch is because obviously I'm not damaging the tree. This branch just fell yesterday probably. And it's going to be dying anyway. So I can take as much of the bark as I want to. So it looks like this is cut into the wood here, but that's not actually the wood of the tree. Right here, you can see I peeled this part back. This is the inner bark, and it's pretty thick. You'd imagine if you debark this whole branch, you could actually have a lot of this material. It's soft and spongy. You can just chew it. It kind of chews like bubble gum, actually. It's very fibrous. White pine has a strong flavor, but it's not unbearable, and you get used to it. So we went over those 5 edible components: the matured needles, the immature needles and new growth, the edible male cones, the edible young female pine cones. Those are the typical cones that you're used to seeing, but at an earlier stage, and also the edible inner bark. This is a underutilized foraging plant, in my opinion. Many people don't realize how many different components there are that are edible on the white pine tree. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and if you have any questions, just post them in the comments. Thanks for watching.